following each other on Twitter, but
I noticed.
it's good to finally interview you.
Look at all those
So,
medals behind you. Who's the
yes,
bowler?
I wish I could say they're mine. They're actually my mother's. She's
Ah,
a big time runner, so
fantastic.
she's done a lot.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, that's intimidating.
Yeah, well, I'm really proud of everything she's done. She's done an amazing job, so it's definitely always my one of my editors was like that works as a background. Like,
I am Raywat Deonandan, Raywatdeonandan. I'm an epidemiologist and associate professor with the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm a global health epidemiologist.
okay, good. See, that's why I ask those questions, because I want to make sure I get the right
That's right.
title.
Exactly. And I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a PhD, the lesser
Okay.
doctor, as my MD spouse reminds me every day. So.
Well, I mean, clearly you have the expertise, though. I mean, it's why you and so many are showing up on our
Yeah, I guess
television.
I thought
So
it
I
was a
mean,
good
there you
looks, but
go.
okay.
So I guess just to start with, I want to find out uh, how does a pandemic
Mm.
turn into an endemic, or if it's just endemic without the word "an"
Yeah, I mean,
before.
what is a pandemic really? There isn't a hard definition. The WHO declares one based upon its own internal administrative needs, and it's declared for the purposes of moving resources around. So a pandemic is, a disease, an epidemic that occurs in more than one WHO regions. That's their definition, I think, or more than two possibly. Epidemiologically, a pandemic is a disease that happens around the world at the same time, more or less. And one could argue that obesity is a pandemic, or heart disease, or traffic accidents. So the definitions are soft. When it comes to infectious disease pandemics, the emergency goes away when the acuteness goes away, and when the number of new cases per day is not so high that it poses a threat to our healthcare system or to our livelihoods. So these definitions are qualitative and depend upon the need of people at the time. For example, the common cold is probably a pandemic, but we don't really think about it that way because it doesn't really affect our lives that much. Right? The flu is, well, I mean, we do declare pandemic influenzas every now and then that are particularly serious. The WHO declares them, but the yearly seasonal flu can be considered pandemic as well, but we don't consider it that way because it doesn't really shut things down or pose a dire threat. So these infectious diseases historically have gone away for mysterious reasons. Some say, for example, the Spanish flu, 1918 Spanish flu, went away because it mutated to irrelevance. Because viruses are always mutating, and eventually, over many generations, they will mutate towards the less problematic variety because ultimately evolution wants to keep them alive by not killing the host too quickly. And so that's the selective pressures. It isn't always the case. HIV hasn't been mutating in that direction particularly. Ebola hasn't been mutating in that direction, or may take many more hundreds of years to do so. So these aren't hard and fast rules. They're just hand-waving arguments. And there's a lot mysterious that still is mysterious about pandemic infectious diseases. Why do they go away? A lot of theories. No one knows quite sure. When it comes to COVID, though, we think with some fair degree of confidence it's going to become endemic, meaning it's going to be around, but not serious and not around all the time for a number of reasons. To get there, let's back up and talk about what the alternative is that it's always present in a serious sense, as it is now, or we eradicate it entirely. It doesn't seem like it's going to always be around in a serious sense because we have vaccines and because we've seen the wave-like behavior, and we know that sometimes it's not as serious. So the vaccines will probably push it to irrelevance, something resembling irrelevance, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a second. But the other option is eradication. It is unlikely that we will see eradication for a number of reasons. Historically, we have eradicated exactly two diseases, smallpox and rinderpest. No one talks about rinderpest because it's an agricultural disease. It doesn't affect humans that much. And the reason we're able to eradicate those two diseases were because they had some characteristics that were amenable to eradication. Number one, we had a powerful vaccine against smallpox. For example, I think over 90% efficacy, if I remember correctly, that conferred lifetime immunity after one shot, and that was useful on children as well. Number two, infection conferred lifetime immunity, so people weren't being reinfected. Number three, Um, the natural reservoir is people. This is important. So the natural reservoir is where the disease lives usually. So influenzas live in pigs and birds. This disease, COVID, lives, we think, in a bird or some kind of rodent, maybe, who knows, or a pangolin, who knows, right? But definitely not necessarily only in humans. So long as a non-human reservoir exists, it can ping pong back and forth. So we drive it out of humans, it goes, retreats to another animal, then comes back again when our immunity wanes. So for that reason, it's not impossible to eradicate it, but the amount of effort it would take to do so is so extraordinary, it just seems unlikely that we can eradicate it. So that leaves us with the vaccination option, and the extent to which the vaccines are powerful and diminish transmission matter. It's possible that our vaccines could have not slowed down transmission. It's possible that it could not have prevented serious disease, in which case COVID would be endemic and serious all the time. Kind of like the way polio was for generations, right? Or even measles. It's it doesn't change civilization that much. It doesn't keep us in terror all the time, but it's always a mortal threat, and it's always a thing that kills our loved ones, right? So it could have gone that way. Luckily, it's not going that way because the vaccines work really well. Now, because the vaccines diminish transmission, we think, in a powerful way, the likelihood is that COVID will be endemic in an unnoticeable way, kind of like the flu. So the flu every year, the vaccines have at best 40% efficacy, and the uptake is at best 40% in a good year. This past year, maybe it got higher because people were scared, and yet the flu kills tens of thousands every year, but never makes the news because we live with the flu. So COVID will go the same route, likely. The vaccine is better, the uptake will be better, but the disease is more lethal and more transmissible. So the combination of those things probably means it'll be with us, but not newsworthy in a couple of years. Now we are fighting this arms race against the virus. It keeps mutating, producing these new variants. Influenza does as well. But we have a new tool. And this new tool is the mRNA vaccine, which is a total game changer. Total game. People don't realize how big this is, right? And what this means is the second we have a new formulation that is particularly dire, we can, once we sequence that genome, produce a new mRNA vaccine in 48 hours. And then within 6 weeks, put that into production. So we're always going to be able to be ahead of the virus at the population level, at least in terms of the arms race, so long as people are willing to line up and get a booster shot as needed. And so that's probably how it's going to go for a number of years until there is sufficient population immunity built up that even that becomes less and less important. So things like, look back at the Spanish flu, there's a reason the Spanish flu killed mostly young people. It's because the elderly were probably exposed to a version of it earlier in their lives and didn't even notice. This might happen here too. So as COVID mutates, older generations have some memory of it, and so there's that built-in resistance to the more serious aspects of it. So the need for intense immunization may diminish over time. Bottom line is that it's not going away. It's going to be with us, but it won't be necessarily noticeable or something we need to worry about on a day-to-day basis. The healthcare system can worry about it the same way they worry about the flu. Same way they worry about measles. So part of your regular immunization. Now, measles, you get it once in your life. I mean, the vaccination rather, and you're done. I mean, not once, a few times. Excuse me, MMR vaccine needs boosters. But this will probably require boosters as well. But there's no way to predict for sure. These are all forecasts, and viruses surprise us all the time. They're smarter than us in many ways. So that's the way it'll likely go.
Okay. I'm just gonna quickly just briefly stop this recording because I want to make sure it processes right, because sometimes you know how these things
I do.
can go. So just want to make sure that kind of just start, do a quick. Sorry, I do apologize for this. I just
problem.
really like to
totally get it. Totally get it.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to also then it'd be like, oh, hey, whole interview didn't work. And you're like, wait, what?
I've done that a number of times, and I'm happy to repeat myself. Don't worry about it.
Okay. going to recreate this. I might use a program called Snagit, and
Okay.
you create the little box. So I want to make sure I create a nice box again. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, good. We're back on track.
Okay.
So I guess just the next question I wanted to ask, just in terms, and you kind of touched on them already, was so for the types of endemics we've seen in the past, so measles could be counted as one, because I know there's also that kind of definition where you could look at HIV as sort of endemic, but
Yeah.
more of a pandemic. So I'm kind of curious, even if there's a bit of a like semi list, you could say, like what sort of
It's a good
endemics we've really
question. It's a
seen.
good question. I don't know for sure. I mean, this is not something I study in depth, and I'm sure some people have their solid definitions. I don't. It's a hand waving definition. And for me, the determining factor is how much it's worrisome. Like HIV is worrisome. It's a pandemic and it can explode out of control. It could shutter
Mm-hmm.
economies. It could destroy nations. So it's always a concern. Same with malaria. We don't talk enough about malaria. It destroys economies and lives. Probably is the biggest killer, infectious killer, of the modern times. Um, so in the category that we would put an endemic COVID, I think the flu is the best category. It would be great if we could put it in the common cold category, but definitely not. Maybe eventually. Um, because it's airborne, it sits in a special pile, right? So other airborne diseases are things like measles and chickenpox, which are hyper transmissible. So it's inappropriate in some ways to compare it to the flu, which is not particularly aerosol driven. It's mostly, droplets and touch. So one thing that this might change, unlike the way the flu changed behavior, the flu changed, pandemic flu changed our behavior in terms of mask wearing and things like that. This changes our relationship to air. The common cold changed our relationship to surfaces. Tell your kids to wash your hands before they come home and all that stuff. Same with other kinds of enteric diseases. But this changes our relationship to ventilation. If it isn't going to go away anytime soon, we're always going to be thinking about the quality of the filters in our school systems, in our hospitals. We're always going to be thinking about, are the windows open when we have gatherings, especially during COVID season. So in this way, it's kind of a unique category. We should have been thinking about those things back in the measles days and the
Mm-hmm.
chickenpox days, but we didn't, and now we know we should. So that's why it's difficult for me to categorize it as just another endemic disease, because it isn't really.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think it's going to change civilization in some ways, maybe not in ways that are noticeable to most people because we are an adaptable species. But other diseases have changed us. HIV changed us. The way we think about sex is completely changed now as a result of 1980 on, and this will change the way we think about ventilation and windows and air. Strangely.
I think the Amazon Prime has that new series, It's a Sin, and that's really educating a lot of people about the HIV pandemic. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those things. I guess just what I'm curious, in terms of uh, like kind of trying to phrase this the right way. Just in terms of once we've reached that sort of post-pandemic world, or when people can maybe say, okay, it's an endemic now. Like, how does that an endemic world look?
Yeah.
And I know that's a broad-based
It's
question,
broken. By
but
the way, I love that we can have this conversation now. We're so close to the end. We can talk about the post-pandemic world. What does it look like? It doesn't look like I'm not an oracle. Obviously, I can't make predictions. But my feeling is it doesn't look that different from 2019, except, oh, okay. I always liken this to 9/11. After 9/11, the world changed for about 4 years. But some things stuck with it. It's supposed to change permanently. And we're supposed to be on guard all the time for security issues, and yet we see a mob raiding the Capitol, and So the things that stuck with us after 9/11 were things like taking your shoes off in the airport. The boring stuff that we now take for granted that is frustrating, but doesn't really change our lives that much. That's what the post-COVID world will look like after a couple of years of panic. Right? So some things will remain with us, like we'll be ready to wear masks. Masks will be normalized. Maybe handshakes will go away. maybe understanding that we may have a time to limit the number of people in our homes in the event of a respiratory disease being present. Maybe the need to do symptom checks before sending your kid to school. That, I hope, remains with us. The need for paid sick days, the need for society to support people to get well when they are ill. I think those things are going to remain with us to some extent. But beyond that, I don't see the world wanting to remember COVID that much. But governments have to remember COVID. We have to have surveillance systems in place. At the industrial level, we have to have live vaccine platforms. Every nation that can afford it needs to have a manufacturing capacity for vaccines. Because this has taught us, if nothing else, that when we put enough money and time, oh my goodness, what we can do scientifically. Who knew we can get a vaccine in under a year? That's crazy. So that means we will expect it from now on, which means we need to have, that kind of economic flexibility, because it was economic flexibility that allowed this to happen, underwriting risk and allowing multiple platforms to be producing in parallel. So the industrial, economic, and governmental side of things, I think, will be profoundly changed. The lifestyle and day-to-day aspects won't be profoundly changed, except for a few small things like normalization of mask wearing, normalization of symptom checks, right, and the understanding of what public health does.
I am curious, like speaking of mass learning, because of course that's been probably one of the most polarizing issues during this pandemic. You have the CDC saying, okay, certain people can actually gather if you've both been vaccinated or a group of you have been vaccinated. You can all gather indoors without masks, without social distancing.
Yeah.
Do you? But at the same time, we want to see somewhat of a normalization of masks. Do you think in this post-pandemic world, it is going to be a case where people should perhaps get used to the idea of having to wear a mask if they want to go to the theater, and not just movie
No,
theater, but theater?
no, I don't think they should get used to having to wear a mask. That's not what I'm talking about. I think when the emergency is over, nobody will be compelled to wear a mask. And when I say when the emergency is over, I mean once we declare that herd immunity is being achieved. So what I mean by normalization of mask wearing is if you got the sniffles or coughing and sneezing and you go to work, wear a mask to protect others. That's common in some countries. It'll be normalized here too. And the reason it hasn't been normalized up till now is that you'd be stared at on the subway or on the bus. Now no one's going to stare at you. They may say, "Hey, thank you for wearing a mask." So to that extent, I think it'll be normalized. I physical distancing, social distancing, I hope that becomes more normalized because, a lot of us are misanthropic and don't want to be around other people. So this helps a little bit. So those of us who are antisocial, it kind of helps, I don't want to talk to people. What I really hope, and I think will be the new norm, is video chatting and video meetings. This is not going anywhere. Thank God. This is fantastic. This changes the way of work. It also changes our relationship to illness and work. So if you have a snow day at school, guess what? You don't really have a snow day. You're going to have a Zoom class, right? If you're sick, you got a broken leg, you can't come to work. Guess what? You are, working on Zoom. So in some ways, industrially, it might actually be better. But the fabric of our social interaction is going to change subtly but profoundly and noticeably. That part will be noticeable. But epidemiologically, in the short term, uh, only vaccinated people will be interacting in a potent way, probably. That's the way it should be. However, I don't think people have a tolerance for that to be sustained longer than a couple of months. That'll fall by the wayside pretty fast. As soon as our incidence rate drops below, let's say, 100 per week, no one's going to tolerate any kind of restrictions anymore. They're willing to roll the dice on someone dying. And they probably should, to be honest, like some risk is worth taking. We don't shut down society for the seasonal flu, even though it does kill people. So when we get to that threshold, I think it probably makes sense to open things up and recognize that we now focus and protect those most likely to be affected. Um, but don't be surprised if we continue to have the public health component of the media reports, because people will have a thirst now to understand, oh, there's a new disease there, I better pay attention. So, in a broader scope, though, I think the thirst for general science literacy will improve. and we need to really strike while the iron is hot and make sure we invest in appropriate public education when people are still interested.
Um, don't have too many questions left, but I did want to find out. Obviously, early on in the pandemic, especially around fall, people were warning, get your flu shot because we don't want to have kind of this double whammy in the
Yeah.
winter. And what we ended up seeing was not only an uptick in flu shots, but it did seem like, kind of the flu sort of disappeared. Not completely, but there definitely was a drastic
Yeah.
decrease from, say, a year prior. Going forward, when we get into that world where, okay, we've got herd immunity and COVID's something we maybe more see seasonally or whatever the case may be, is it going to be a situation, and it's very hard to predict, I know, but where we would put hospitals may have to deal with both flu and COVID? Is there going to be a strain there?
Oh, interesting. I haven't thought about that. There might be. It might be a bit of a strain sometimes. What I'm hoping to see is as we build these vaccine platforms with rapid manufacturing capacity, then we can inoculate so fast that that will not be an issue. Even the flu, I don't know this for sure, but I'm speculating that maybe the mRNA technology can be turned onto the flu as well. Because right now, a panel is struck months before the flu season hits North America, and we look at what's circulating and we take a guess. That's why the efficacy is usually 40% at best. But now we can target it even better, get that above 70, even 80%. Suddenly the flu can go away every year entirely. So we have it in our power now to completely, not completely, but almost eliminate the potency of the flu to affect our healthcare system, in which case it doesn't have to have that strain.
And I guess just uh, we've talked about endemic. Is there a way of determining sort of what type of endemic this
Mm.
is? I mean, you
Yeah, yeah,
have measles, you
yeah.
have other sorts. Is there any way of determining that?
Yeah, a little bit. It comes down to the nature of the vaccines. And we will know this in a few months. We will know how much transmission the vaccines actually do reduce. Is it 30% or is it 90%? Right? And the higher, the greater the amount of transmission it reduces, the more likely it becomes the common cold versus tetanus, versus polio or something like that. Um, and how much the vaccines reduce severe illness. So right now, the mRNA vaccines really reduce severe illness substantially. The other ones a little less so. So overall, what is the effect of global vaccination on the wide diversity of vaccines? What is the sum total of the reduction in severe cases? And that combined with the overall efficacy of the vaccine and how long immunity wanes will tell us which category of endemicity, can't pronounce that, we're in. Best case scenario, everything fires in all cylinders, and we barely notice this thing ever again. Even better case scenario, it mutates into irrelevance. People sometimes ask, where is the 1918 Spanish flu? It's still here. There's DNA from that flu virus floating around in our various, flus that come by every now and then. The same might be true for COVID. It'll still be here as a descendant, but maybe not as a potent destroyer of worlds.
And I guess just one of my very last questions. You mentioned mutate into irrelevancy. Is would you say it's herd immunity that is the categorizer that says, okay, we're sort of
Hmm.
in endemic now, or is it
Yeah,
there's many factors?
there are many factors. Herd immunity is a big part of it because herd immunity tells us the reproduction number cannot go above one, which means the number of cases in society will not be high. Therefore, we shouldn't worry about it as a population. As individuals, absolutely, if you're affected, you should take care, and public health should always monitor this, and hospitals should always be aware of the symptoms and the treatments and so forth. But the amount of immunity we have in the population should always be maintained above a certain level so that this never becomes a big deal again. And how do we do that? Either through immunization or making sure that people who get it recover and don't die. But immunization is a preferred method, which means that probably we'll have to, well, we'll probably be doing antibody testing for a number of years to see how much immunity is waning and to know whether or not we need to start the boosting process. It may just be a booster every few years. It may be every year. Don't know yet. It looks like it's going to be every couple of years, to be honest, depending upon which vaccine is prominent in your society. So it won't be just like the flu. It'll probably be more like, hepatitis, which you get, 3 shots of. And this, let's say it's 3 shots over the course of 6 years, then suddenly COVID is not with us to a large extent anymore. So then it's not part of our lives. It may come back again in a decade or two after that, but it's not part of our lives after that. So it gets hard to predict, but a number of scenarios present themselves. Oops, I can't hear you anymore. I've lost your audio.
Oh, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
Just 1 second. My recording. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly stop that because it's being kind of silly.
Cool.
Okay, I do apologize.
No problem.
Okay. Let me do that again. Sorry, it was being weird. I do hate to ask you this because I
Please.
was noticing my recording was being weird, and I apologize. I think just ran into that exact problem we were talking
Sure.
about. I do have to just kind of circle back to the one question about like what will like a post-pandemic endemic world look like. I'm sorry to be
No
making you
problem. No
repeat
problem.
this.
Yeah.
This technology,
No,
I
yeah,
swear.
that's fine. That's fine. A post-pandemic world. It depends on if we're talking about medically, in terms of healthcare system, in terms of our regular lives. I think in terms of what we do in epidemiology, we're going to have some good disease surveillance in place. I think that's a no-brainer. We're going to have improved public health infrastructure in terms of communications, I hope. In terms of what it means for governments and the industrial sector, we have to have a live vaccine platform and manufacturing process in every industrialized country. I think that's pretty clear now. We have to be able to act reflexively and quickly and to turn around new vaccine doses in the face of new threats. But for individuals, not a lot will change after the current crisis goes away, except that masks will be normalized. I don't mean wear masks all the time. I mean, if you are sick, if you got the symptoms of even the cold, it'll be socially normal to wear a mask before getting on the subway to protect other people, like what we see in some Asian countries. So culturally, we will change in that sense. I think handshakes may go away, or at least no one will look at you funny if you choose not to shake hands. So touching each other may not be as socially common as it used to be. I think working from home will be heavily normalized, as it should be. I think the productivity expectations, if you're sick at home, may actually go up, which is not a great thing. So if you've broken your leg or you're sick at home, you can still work via video chat. I think snow days at school are a thing of the past because we're going to have Zoom classes now. I think symptom checks are going to be normal. So if your kid's about to go to school, you check him or her over for, a runny nose or coughing and decide, maybe I don't want to expose other kids to my kids' germs. That cultural shift, I think, will take place. And in terms of what hospitals will be doing differently, we will always be on guard for things like COVID. Our infectious control protocols will be ramped up as they were after SARS, but in a more rigorous way. And the ways in which we prepare for emergencies like this, everything from PPE to infection control parameters to human resources needs, are going to be really re-examined and looked at. But for individuals, you and me, going about our lives, not a lot will change except for we will have a higher tolerance for more frequent vaccination because that might be required every couple of years, at least for another decade or so, I think.
Okay. And I guess just maybe more of a simplified version, but how would you like classify endemic? Just I don't want you to have to repeat the
Yeah,
whole thing again because I
yeah,
did get that, but
sure.
even if you can kind of give a gist.
An endemic disease, to my mind, is one that is always with us to some extent, some months more so than others, but it doesn't really change our society, or nor do we think about it a lot. So it's a qualitative appraisal based upon the extent to which it occupies space in our brains. That's what it means to me.
Okay. And I do apologize. I like this time the recording is working. The recording is working. What you've been saying now has been captured. I just did want to ask in terms of masking. We did talk about the aspect of like normalization of masks, but is it going to be a case where people can't go to a theater
Right.
without wearing a mask?
No, in the future, there won't be a situation where people are required to wear masks to do certain things. I don't think so. At least not as justified by COVID. It'll be more of we encourage you to wear a mask if you've got symptoms of a respiratory disease because that's the polite thing to do. But the mandating of masks really is only relevant in times of public health emergency. And this emergency will go away in a few months.
Okay. And I guess just that one of those last questions I asked in terms of like how is it we can determine what type of endemic this will be, whether it's
Yeah.
common cold or
Yeah, this will be determined by the quality of the vaccine. So, is the vaccine, how well does it reduce transmission? How well does it reduce the likelihood of severe disease versus mild disease? And how long does it offer immunity for? Those three factors combined will probably tell us how serious COVID's presence will be with us in the long term.
Is there anything else about this topic, about the topic of endemic and its relation to COVID-19, that my questions maybe didn't really give you a chance to
No,
to
that's
bring
pretty
up?
thorough. It's pretty thorough. And frankly, we have to remember we live with a whole lot of diseases all the time. We just don't think about it because we let the healthcare system manage it. And that's what we have to do here. Just let the healthcare system manage it, do what we're told and what's required of us when asked, and we will get through this for the rest of our lives.
I think that's everything. I think in the various recordings we did, I've got enough. And you know how these pieces are. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
because it's a more of a featurey piece, it will be longer necessarily than 5 or 10 seconds.
sure.
But nonetheless, I think within what we've done, I have what I need for sure.
Fantastic.
I'll get in touch if I need to talk to you
No problem.
again.
It's a
But
good
I
topic.
really do appreciate this, and thank you for your patience with the recordings.
My-
It's not always the most friendly of
ha,
programming. This is why I find Zoom can be a bit more helpful, but at
right.
the same time, like I said, I wanted to do whatever technology was best for you. So
Oh, next time Zoom is fine.
okay, no problem. Sorry, I should have been clear. It's like whatever works best. But thank you again.